So we have some state, and we have the UI being kept in sync with that state, but our state never changes, which makes it not very interesting. So let's make state change at some point. Now, you cannot just say this.state.name equals something else. You can never modify state directly. You have to use setState. The reason is React decides when to redraw the page by paying attention to when state changes and when your props change from the outside. So if you just change them directly, it's not going to notice that you did that. It has no way to watch for that. Instead, it does it because you called setState. So it knows state changed, so it can compare them and do what it needs to do to decide which portion of the page to redraw. Because the whole idea here is we're keeping our UI in sync with our data, which is what we were doing the hard way last week. So you do need to call this.setState. And I suppose it needs to happen. Let's make it happen when we click a button. Let's just throw a button in here. It says update heading. Sounds good. What just happened? And we'll just make that change the name here. So we'll add a method for that. Add a method called update name. And instead of just saying like this.state.name equals something else, I need to call this.setState. And I pass this.setState an object with any keys in state that I want to change. So I want to change name, and I want to change it to Ashley. I like my trailing commas. So there's also acrobats in state. You're not replacing the entire state object with this object. It's not going to blow away acrobats. It's only going to look at the properties that you passed in. If I wanted to blow away acrobats, I could say acrobats null or something, or bull. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm only changing the name. So just keep that in mind. You're not passing in the entire state object that you want to replace it with. You're just passing the properties that should change. And it does that for you. So then I need this button to actually do that. So in React, we don't do add event listener and so on because we're not actually messing with the DOM directly. Instead, we use props. So it's kind of like the super old way of doing it in HTML. We actually pass it a prop called onClick. And unlike HTML, this is case sensitive. So that C must be capitalized. In HTML and in JavaScript, that is actually lowercase. But we're consistent in JSX and React. So it is called onClick. And you just set that equal to the function that you want to run. And it's not just the name of the function. It's not a string value. It's an actual JavaScript expression, so you must put it inside curly braces. And then you just give it the name of the function you want to run. So this.update name. Let's see what happens. Nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? What did we do wrong? Why have we been betrayed? Yeah.
The context of this changes.
Yeah, right? Remember good old this? So ordinarily in an event handler, this gets set to the target of the event, right? Well, this isn't a real event handler because this is React, but it is not what we want it to be. Instead, it's, if I remember correctly, null. React doesn't set it to anything in an event handler. Good times. So we have to deal with that. So one way we've learned to deal with that in the past, we could put an arrow function in here, call this.update name. Totally works. Let's try that. There we go. Another fairly common way to do this, if we wanted to leave this as this.update name, one way you'll see a lot is in the constructor, you just take all your methods and set them to themselves with bind. We never talked about bind, did we? Because it never came up. It usually comes up. So this is kind of the oldest way you have of changing the value of this. If you just call bind on a function, whatever you pass inside the parentheses will be bound to this inside that function. And when you pass that around as an argument or whatever, the value of this will just go with it. Doesn't matter if it is an event handler or something else. That binding of this will just be part of that function. So that's another common way to do it. Inside the constructor, just put this. That way, every time you use it from then on, this will be bound the way you want. You could, of course, just do bind this down here, but then you'd have to remember to do it everywhere. So you notice I keep backspacing over all these solutions because none of these are the way we're going to do it long term anymore because they're all kind of a pain in the neck. The arrow function thing isn't too bad. But there is something we can do in ES6 classes that is fairly new. It's a very new part of ECMAScript. It's not, they just announced what made it into ECMAScript 2018. I don't think this was in there, but this has reached a stage in the standards process that it will be in a future version of ECMAScript. And one of the cool things about Babel, which I mentioned very briefly as a thing that can translate JSX into real JavaScript, other cool thing about Babel is it can translate bleeding edge JavaScript to previous versions of JavaScript that will run in browsers that don't necessarily support them yet. So we can use some super new features that aren't well supported because Babel supports them and translates them into compatible older code. So that means we can do this. You can actually set the properties of a class by using assignment. So that means we could actually, dirty little secret, we could actually set state out here, and it works. You don't absolutely have to use the constructor anymore. And that also means we can do a really cool thing with our methods. What if I just said update name equals an arrow function? It's just a very small change to the way that I wrote the function. I added 3 characters plus some spaces. Let's put an equal sign there and an arrow here. And now update name, this dot update name is an arrow function, and I don't have to worry about the value of this. And it works. So I suppose I could use the same trick to update the array, right? Just use this.setState to change the value of the array. Yeah, let's do that.